Afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Emmy Betts, and I'm the Deputy Director of the Injury and Violence Prevention Center, which is a joint venture between the Colorado School of Public Health and the University of Colorado School of Medicine. I'm going to be kicking things off today, and I'm really excited for our speakers and our topic. Before we start, a few logistics. We will be recording the webinar today, and we will send out the link to everyone who registered. We'll also put a link in the chat for our website where you can find recordings from past webinars. We hope you'll also mark your calendar for our next webinar, which will be January 11th from noon Mountain Time to 1 p.m. We'll have speakers Amy Bonami and Rachel Kennedy talking about social media and dating violence with a webinar entitled Snapchat Maps, DMs, and Beauty and the Beast, Understanding Toxic Tropes. So before we jump in today, I hope that throughout the session, you will put in questions into the Q&A box. We'll have a moderated question and answer session at the end. And now it is my great pleasure to introduce our speakers. I'm going to introduce all three and then turn it over to them. Our first speaker is Erin Wright Kelly, who's a research associate here at the Injury and Violence Prevention Center. She is so as I mentioned, she's a research associate at the Injury and Violence Prevention Center at the Anschutz campus. Much of her research focuses on policies and practices that address social determinants of health and violence, suicide, substance misuse, and mental health outcomes. Erin specializes in translating research to practice and building partnerships to collaboratively improve community health, and I am thrilled that I get to work with her. Next up is James Roy II, Executive Director of Denver Metro Community Impact. He is a community advocate, a Denver native as well, urban planner, social entrepreneur, and artist. He was raised in Northeast Denver, and he now serves as I mentioned, as the Executive Director of Denver Metro Community Impact, which elevates community voice to identify neighborhood interests and needs, as well as match philanthropic and government funding to support those community needs. He has expertise in inclusive urban planning and design, and he founded Urbanity Advisors to cultivate equity in urban environments. And third, but certainly not least, is Sarah Martinez, who's a health promotion specialist at the Pueblo Department of Public Health and Environment. She was raised in Pueblo and continues to be an active community member who advocates for the needs of the Pueblo community. She's a health promotion specialist at the Pueblo Department of Public Health and Environment, and she works to mobilize her community to address youth health concerns and build environments where youth can flourish. And she is also a newly elected representative to the Pueblo City Council. So thank you again for joining us. To the audience, please put your questions in the Q&A and we will get to them at the end. And now I will turn it over to you all. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. So Sarah, James, and I are actually going to be co-presenting today, so you'll kind of hear us flip between just what we all have to say. But we did want to thank right off the bat the Injury and Violence Prevention Center for hosting us. And second, to all of you participants joining James, Sarah, and I as we share lessons, we've learned about how we can mobilize communities to advance upstream prevention of youth violence and injury. We're really glad you're here. I've collaborated with and learned from James and Sarah for about 4 years each now, and I'm especially excited for you all to hear from them today. While I've worked with them on different projects over this time, one project that all three of us shared is called Community Organizing for Prevention, which is funded by the Injury and Violence Prevention Mental Health Promotion Branch at the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment. Sarah and James represent 2 of the 30 or so community or local public health agencies funded by this effort to increase upstream prevention efforts in local communities. And my team and I at CU lead the statewide evaluation and support integration of research and data into practice for this effort. Some of what you hear today are efforts underway as a result of this funding stream, but others aren't. We simply wanted to have a shout out that we were lucky to live in a state that invests in and supports upstream prevention of adverse health outcomes among youth. But upstream prevention is happening across Colorado, regardless of this funding source. We wanted to first highlight why we believe youth violence and injury are so important to focus on in the United States. This visual shows the top 10 leading causes of death within age groups and across all age groups on the far right. You can see that unintentional injury deaths, such as deaths from motor vehicle accidents, drowning, poisonings, fires, firearms, falls, and sports and recreation, are all highlighted in blue. In red are homicides, and in green are suicides. When we focus in on youth ages 10 to 24 here, you can see that unintentional injuries, suicide, and homicide are all within the top 4 causes of death for young people in the US. Expand this out as we age, and even to the age of 44, all 3 of these injury categories are within the top 5 causes of death in the US. This is why we believe the focus on youth violence and injury is so important, because all of these deaths can be prevented. We have numerous data sources that help us understand possible behaviors that might predict these deaths, and we included examples of how we can measure these with the data sources that you see at right here. These examples of behaviors that we might measure are mental or emotional distress, substance misuse, suicidal ideation, interpersonal violence, and motor vehicle safety. The indicators you see at right are ones that are in the Youth Risk Behavioral Surveillance System, YRBSS, or in Colorado, what we use as the Healthy Kids Colorado survey. And these really ask youth directly about how these behaviors are at play in their lives. Collecting information on these behaviors allows us to understand what might be happening among youth in our society so that we can develop culturally appropriate strategies to intervene if they've already begun. While there are many programs that help to intervene and provide supports to youth, they are already engaging in these behaviors. The focus of our conversation today is really about prevention. So these are efforts that we can undertake to make sure that these behaviors never start in the first place. So while we're focused in this conversation on youth violence and injury prevention today, we won't over-focus on these outcomes or behaviors, instead focusing on the community and systems that shape these behaviors and how we can improve the world around us to stop youth violence and injury from happening before it begins. So our intent today is to have you hear from all 3 of us about how we've brought together community and scientific expertise to collaboratively address local community concerns. We first wanted to kick it off with a story from James to help understand how community thinks about behaviors that we see among youth in the data and how they dig deeper to understand what might be happening to cause these behaviors.
Yeah, thanks, Erin. So yeah, this is a picture of my 12th birthday, actually. You can see the date on there. But one of the things, that I really wanted to tell is a story of, a parallel story of a youth that I work with in the Park Hill neighborhood in Denver. Also compared to my story that I'll share in just a second here. When I was living in this house that this picture was taken in, I was accustomed to hearing gunshots quite often, and to the point where I literally thought that it was normal to hear gunshots out front of your house in every house in America. It didn't have a context to compare it to, but during this birthday right here is where I learned a really valuable lesson, actually. Later on that night, when I was supposed to have a sleepover with all these guys here, and a drive-by happened to cross the street, and I was doing my drive-by drill thing, which is get away from the windows and make sure you're safe and getting down. And my friends were freaking out, and within moments of the drive-by ending, they all called their parents and went home, ending my sleepover really quickly. So as a upset 12-year-old, my mom had to explain to me what was going on, what their expectation of their community safety was, and that that situation for them was not normal, and that it was something that they needed to, that they felt they needed to escape. And so that was my first lesson around neighborhood inequities, and knowing that it wasn't the same in my friends' neighborhoods. And with that story, I think there's a lot of things, a lot of components that from that there was a lot of trauma that was created within me that led to some interesting behavior later on in life that I had to adjust from, but I also had two college educated parents that both graduated from CU as well, that really stuck with me and really were able to pour into me a lot of the lessons in life, trajectory into a different direction. Now, just recently, I was working with in the past couple of years, working with a young kid named, I'll actually, now I won't share his name, of course, even though I'll just share his name as Adam, even though his name is not. Adam was a kid at one of the elementary schools in the area that I work in, Park Hill, and he was also accustomed to hearing gunshots a lot, and he was removed out of his classroom and put into a classroom that was really for kids that were not learning well in the regular class. And it was really if you look at it from the outside perspective, you'd say this is the bad kids classroom. Adam had a lot of energy issues, wasn't able to sit down and really, concentrate on his schoolwork. So one of the things that you'd notice about him is that, for a teacher, for anyone observing that, it's very frustrating. But if you looked into Adam's life deeper, you would understand a little bit more about what's going on. So his father was a former blood gang member in the Park Hill neighborhood, went to prison for a bit, and came back and was unable to find employment, was basically being a stay-at-home father, and was raising Adam and raising his sister as well, while they tried to deal with the dynamics of their community, which Adam has stories about his front window being shot out at his home, seeing people beat up quite often, and dealing with a lot of gang violence. He already knew what gang violence was in the 4th grade and was accustomed to it. So when you think about these types of things, and I'm going to school and leaving all his problems at the door, expected to sit in the classroom and be the little business person that can put those problems aside, you start to understand that that's just not possible. And even further, Adam one day was hanging out in his front yard with his sister while his dad was inside inside taking care of something, and his sister ran into the street, the residential street there, and was ran over by a car right in front of Adam. And so when you see these types of things that happen in life, and Adam being expected to go to school after witnessing that, the week later, we're all, you look at what the different situations that each of these students, and I'll wrap this up soon, I'm sorry for going long here, wrapping this, but the different situations that a young kid like Adam has to deal with, versus a child that may have had, say, for example, a full breakfast before they went to school, were put to bed at a really reasonable time, or had a different expectation of community safety within their block, that they're not going to school with the same type of trauma, same type of thoughts in their mind, and memories of things that are completely distracting them from the school day. And so what those things have come out from in Adam and some of his peers is what looks like outrageous behavior, what looks like someone that's not sitting still, not able to learn, but he's gone through what a lot of people will never go through in their lives. And so being able to think about the causes, the root causes of what what Adam's going through, what his peers were going through in that classroom, and really going after those is something that I'd really love to, why I'm a part of this conversation, and why I think bridging research and community and understanding is going to create better situations for kids like myself and Adam. And so I'll just wrap it up, that up right there. I'll return more in just a bit. So thanks, Erin.
James. Yeah. And this is, we really want to highlight story and real experience in this webinar too. So, and I think to just go to what James says, I just want to highlight then what the research lens is, which is that we put a lot of fancy words on exactly what James was really talking about with what his experience and Adam's experience was when he was saying that Adam was expected to leave things at the door. Those are those visible things in this case. Can you hear me? Okay, sorry, it says that I can't. Oh, sorry. In this case, so that leaving experiences at the door is what we see here of, in this case, the violence and injury outcomes and behaviors. That's all we could see of Adam in the classroom in that story. But what James is talking about with he and Adam's stories is what we refer to in the research world really as the underlying risk factors that we can be addressing, those invisible pieces sometimes to us. We don't see the roots of the tree necessarily, but we know they're there and we need to dig deeply for them. He mentioned in his case, housing, that and Adam's, that housing, that his neighborhood, that gunshots were the norm, that they would hear in that. Adam's father was unemployed. Adam was having a difficult time with school involvement, with family involvement. His father was previously incarcerated. James was lucky enough to have college educated parents. All of these are underlying risk factors that we feel like we can move towards. The other piece I would also highlight that James went into as well, that we talk about from the research lens, is that these risk factors actually happen across what we refer to as the social ecological model or spectrum. And what you see here is that the individual level focuses on biological or personal history factors like age, education, income, substance use, or history of abuse as an example. But the relationship level focuses on the influence of a person's family, friends, or partners. The community level kind of starts to go a little bit more deep and says, like, what is the individual circumstance in terms of their neighborhood, schools, workplaces? And the societal level focuses on the societal factors such as social norms or the health, economic, educational, or social policies that influence how we live and interact with the world around us. In those community and societal ones, these often determine a lot of the inequities that are experienced across geographic and demographic groups in our society as well. And at the community and societal levels, I would just highlight that we often refer to those as the social determinants of health, which are the conditions and environments where people live, learn, work, play, and worship that affect health outcomes experienced by individuals. So I'll hand it back to Sarah now, who will talk more about how communities see those stories that James talked about or see those risk factors and respond and develop strategies to address them over time.
So taking the risk and protective factor framework that Erin just spoke about and then applying it to James's story about Adam, there's several ways that primary prevention practitioners like us, like many of you on the call, could have intervened far before the behavior that Adam was starting to display and before Adam was put into that bad kid's classroom. So for example, I think implementing some economic supports could have really prevented a lot of the poverty that was experienced by Adam's families. And so by economic supports, providing access to free quality childcare for Adam and his sister, providing mortgage assistance or creating systems for families to access affordable housing could have prevented a lot of that economic deprivation that family was seeing. Implementing evidence-based programming in the schools to build socio-emotional intelligence and skills for young people, really intervening at that interpersonal level, but really helping children to self-regulate and build resilience. So that could have prevented a lot of the outbursts that Adam had in the classroom. Another kind of primary prevention strategy that might have helped Adam was increasing a lot of pro-social opportunities in his life and in his sister's life. So we know that research says that having access to mentoring, having access to after-school programs like Boys and Girls Club could have helped to, again, build that socio-emotional health, that resilience, and to really prevent a lot of the problem behaviors that Adam had in his life. So those are a couple of primary prevention strategies that could have been in place and prevented a lot of that problem behavior that Adam displayed.
Perfect. Thank you, Sarah. So, and then I just want to draw attention to a lot of what Sarah pointed out here too, which is that she was talking about how as a prevention practitioner, she really sees like, what could we have done before Adam got to that point, right? So she talked about, and you can see in this model that this is the health impact pyramid, which looks quite a bit like the social ecological model. But what we're kind of saying is that the things at the top really focus on individual efforts or efforts to really help individuals when they're at a point where they could use more intensive support. What she kind of mentioned there, for example, is those evidence-based programming in schools, that each of those individuals is getting targeted lessons to build their resilience. But as you move down this health impact pyramid, the goal is to really to move beyond just supporting individuals with different issues, but to move into population impact. And she mentioned that a lot of economic supports might have been helpful as well, that whether they had childcare support early on or affordable housing, mortgage assistance, all of those pieces might have helped in terms of creating the environment that would be supportive to Adam in kind of his growth and development. The other piece then that we talk about quite a bit is that as we're shifting down that health impact pyramid to have more of a population impact, we're also talking about moving upstream to address the community and societal conditions that affect youth decisions and behaviors. Because these upstream prevention strategies have the potential to affect those large portions of the population, we also know that they're powerful and that they can be leveraged to really address the root causes of health inequities. Economic supports as a great example of trying to make sure that differentially impacted groups have access to more to help support those issues. And then the other piece I would mention, and Sarah and use the word evidence-based too in terms of what she's talking about as well, is that we're lucky enough in Colorado, and specifically within the Community Organizing for Prevention funding stream, to have developed and are currently updating a website that will be publicly available in 2022. This shows evidence-informed strategies that address those root causes at the community and societal levels to address risk factors or to build protective factors, which Sarah also gave examples of. Those are things that help buffer against risk that might exist in community as well. And this is only a short portion of the list that we have, but it's really to give an example of what's available on the menu for communities to use to inform prevention strategies when they're working in practice. So some of the strategies in that menu will be discussed as I now hand over the slides to Sarah and James to provide case studies of upstream prevention in Pueblo and Denver in Colorado. They'll be discussing community mapping as a strategy, school improvement efforts, quality early childcare, and inclusive urban planning and design, highlighting what their communities did, what they found out, and what impact these efforts have had in Pueblo and Denver. And with that, I'll pass it to you, Sarah.
The one community level strategy that we are implementing here in Pueblo is really looking at how can we increase access for young people to engage in pro-social opportunities. And that strategy is really to prevent youth substance use. So one of the things that we did a couple of years ago was we conducted a series of focus groups with Pueblo young people, and we met them where they're at. So after school programs, Boys and Girls Clubs, schools, online schools, and we went to these young people and we gave them each a tablet. And on that tablet, there was a map of Pueblo County, which is what you see on the screen, that was made by our friends at the GIS office. And we asked them, okay, young people, mark on the tablet where you like to go hang out in Pueblo and where you want to go more often but you can't because of X, Y, or Z reason. And so they took some time, and it was really interactive using mobile technology. And so the blue dots are where young people like to go hang out. The green dots are where they want to go more often. And then that provided us really rich quantitative data. And then we followed up with all of those young people, and we said, okay, tell us a little bit why you can't, why you want to go more often. What's the barrier there? And so we engaged in a really lengthy focus group process, which provided a lot of rich qualitative data. And what we found is that one, where youth like to go hang out, it happens in clusters. So you can see that kind of like the green and blue dots all kind of cluster. And so this really said, okay, young people like to really have a centralized place and space in Pueblo. It's not really scattered out. Two, the biggest barriers for young people to access pro-social opportunities, one was transportation. I can't get there. I don't have a car. I don't have a skateboard. My parents don't have a car. Two was safety. So I can't go to the park at night because I don't feel safe. I can't go to the library because it has a single entrance and there's a lot of homeless together. The third barrier was really affordability and cost, which I think speaks to itself. And then four, we named it like the cool factor. So, the after school programs aren't cool enough for me to engage in. And so we took all of this data and we created this fabulous map that you're seeing in front of you, and a couple of impacts that I just wanted to briefly touch on. One, we have used this map as a critical decision-making tool for all things that we do in the coalition. And we've actually added to the map crime data from our friends at the police department, which is the hotspots that you're seeing. So the redder the spot is, the more crime there is. And we were able to correlate where youth to go, and then create safety interventions if there's a high prevalence of crime. We then took that crime data and presented it back to the police department and said, hey, there's an area down here on the south side of Pueblo where young people really like to go. It's really, really unsafe though between these hours, and they were able to increase patrol. Another really good kind of win in terms of an organizational policy that we were able to do is we presented this data out to our local library district, and we said, okay, young people love to go there, but young girls in particular, across all focus groups that we did with over 80 young people, teenage girls felt uncomfortable entering in and out of one of the local libraries because of the high prevalence of homelessness. So they were able to really actually change not only their built environment in the library, but their whole system. And now they have just a whole section just for young people. So if you're an adult, you'll get kicked out. It's just for young people to try and increase that safety. Another huge win that's kind of a community level policy is we heard loud and clear that, hey, I want to go to Lake Pueblo, but I can't get there because of transportation barrier. And so last year, we were able to fund collectively free public transportation for all young people here in Pueblo County. So now they just have to show their student ID and they can ride for free. And whereas before they had to get a physical ticket, it was a really non-youth friendly option. And so we've really tried to eliminate that transportation inequity with providing free public transportation for all students. So that's one way that we have kind of tried to increase access for young people to take advantage of all of the pro-social opportunities in Pueblo.
Oh, the slide's me, sorry. Yeah, so this is a story about really how DMCI, Denver Metro Community Impact, has shifted the way that we do collective impact. And really it's about increasing the sense of community ownership on the projects that we're on, as well as being able to really guide everything from beginning to end and be a part of that in a lot of ways, and also increasing the equity of it. And I'll inform more about that equity a couple slides in the future here. But this slide is about a project that we did in Montbello in partnership with Denver Public Schools. And it was really about, making sure that we find out what originally it was about, what reopening Montbello High School would look like, how it would be designed, and what people want to see from it. And through our partnership with DPS, we found a really cool opportunity to dive deeper and understand things beyond just what DPS was trying to get, so that it didn't end up being just a community engagement check the box situation. And so what we did was we used our community impact workflow, which is on the right side of this slide, which is really about, you see this community voice at the top there, being able to have dialogues, these small dialogues that invite people in to speak their experiences, their mind, their desires, concerns, and sentiments around the thing that we're trying to engage over, which of course was the school. And that is enabled and led by other community leaders that are paid to be a part of this, called community navigators, that we employ. And as a result from that, we were able to produce the qualitative data that is in our community voice reports that you can find on our website as well. And after our community voice reports are published, we're able to utilize that qualitative data fortified with even more quantitative data to fortify the community's voice and really put the action to that voice and produce the advocacy solution or change that comes from that. So within this project in Montbello, one of the big results that came from that, we brought the community together to talk about the school and the design and everything like that. And like I said, the things that came from it were deeper. We allowed, it wasn't facilitated to just get those answers. It was loosely facilitated to be able to hear what communities actually going through, what they're experiencing. We hosted a third of these talks in Spanish, and we're able to really even dive deeper on some of the concerns around that. So what came from that were direct stories linked to deeper findings in safety, community safety, bullying, the violence prevention, what it would look like for the school to continuously engage the parents and the youth. And by the way, a lot of these meetings actually had youth leading them as well too, that had either recently graduated from high school or were currently in high school. And another thing that other things that came from that were concerns around diversity, equity, and inclusion. And then one of the bravest things I think that DPS really, the folks that we worked with at DPS were ready for and wanted was what the sentiment of the displeasure with DPS looked like. And so we were able to pull in qualitative data around all these issues that went deeper than what the design of the school was, so that not only is the school going to be designed with the community in mind and what they had to say, but also the school administration and DPS had the opportunity to think about some of the things that parents were expecting and what youth were expecting from this situation. And so one of the results, from that is that we really saw, and of course it's still too early in the future for us to say that this is true, but I think what we've heard multiple times, that it led to a renewed feeling of ownership in the process and a sense of trust kind of returning for DPS, and the ability for for the parents to trust that the schools could take care of their children. And those stories were really what was defining it, that community safety, like I said, and diversity, equity, and inclusion. That's it for my slide there.
So one of our other community level evidence-based strategies is really working to increase quality childcare here in Pueblo. And so this is really primary prevention strategy. And what we did in the very beginning of implementing this strategy was kind of a gaps assessment locally to identify, okay, here's the early childhood system here in Pueblo. Where are our gaps? And when we did this assessment, we did a series of interviews and engagement with community members, parents, our local early childhood council, childcare professionals themselves, and we collected all of this information, and we found out that one of the biggest gap in early childhood in Pueblo was accessibility, availability, and affordability of high quality care. Now, when we really dug into that, one of the reasons why that there's not a lot of available high quality slots is because it's a really cumbersome process for childcare providers to even want to open and offer slots. So then that kind of led us into a whole downhill rabbit hole of, okay, how can we address that barrier to make it easier for childcare providers to open? So we worked collaboratively with the city planning office to map out a whole process of when a childcare provider wants to open and provide those high quality slots, what are they going to do? And we found out that the application to even get zoned as a childcare home was an exorbitant amount of money, especially for a childcare home. And then you only had 6 months to implement all of the city planning recommendations. And if you didn't, you had to repay your application fee, which was $500 each time you applied. So that's one of the barriers why providers weren't opening. So we were able to actually work collaboratively with our city council at the time, and we're able to reduce that zoning application to $100. So you go from a $500 upfront application fee to $100 application fee with way more time than to correct your childcare home zoning space. And we were able to see an increase in zoning applications that were turned in. So some metrics, there were only 5 zoning applications that were turned in 6 years. Since this policy has been passed the city council level, we've already seen about 8 or 8 zoning applications turn in that time. So we know that it works. This past year, we were able to expand that policy change to Pueblo County by working collaboratively with our county commissioners. So now each childcare home in Pueblo County is completely free zoning application. And then we're hoping to take that back to the city and say, hey, your friends in the county, it's free. Maybe you should reduce it again. So we really started small on that policy change, focusing in the city, expanded it then to the county to really increase or eliminate those barriers of affordability for childcare providers to open their slots. One other thing that we're working on here in Pueblo in terms of policy change are at organizational levels to really be more family friendly. So we have a full-time FTE here at the health department whose job is really to go out and do a lot of recruitment of businesses, big and small, and change their policies to be more family friendly, because we know, going back to the story about Adam that James told, if there's more supports for quality childcare in a life, if the business that you work for is more family friendly, the less economic deprivation that you'll see in a community, and the less likely they are then to see problem behaviors in your young people living in the community. So those are a couple of community level policy examples in Pueblo, as well as an organizational policy change to be more family friendly.
Yeah, the next case study I'll speak of is another one in Park Hill, really defined by the legacy of really systemic inequity really brought on by the legacy of urban planning. And so, what we've got, everyone knows about segregation and redlining. I think redlining has become something that a lot of folks are aware of, where values of homes were defined by, in large part, by the racial demographic that was in the community, and that was not allowed to buy outside of certain neighborhoods. Now, one thing I think that people probably need to even learn more of is the difference between de jure and de facto segregation. So de jure segregation is the typical segregation that we're all very aware with, that we've learned in our history books, that was where by law and public policy, it was Black individuals could not live in white neighborhoods. That was, of course, declared unconstitutional in 1917, to where now it has become more of the de facto segregation side of things. A de facto is defined by the segregation that is driven by private practices, like within the economy, or within an industry like real estate or banking, and not all from law or government policy. And so it ends up being an often nuanced and concealed form of segregation that has, of course, impacted the way that neighborhoods even look today. So this map that you're looking at right here is of Park Hill, Greater Park Hill, which is divided into 3 different sections. Got Northeast Park Hill at the top, North Park Hill in the middle, and South Park Hill at the bottom. You'll notice in on the left side that there are blue and purple dots on the screen. Each dot represents one person. Blue dots represent the Black individuals in the neighborhood. The purple dots represent the Latinx people in the neighborhood, and the green dots represent the white people in the neighborhood. And you can notice there's a pretty segregated pattern going on in Greater Park Hill. On the right side, you'll notice the comparison of that map to the low to moderate income percentage of each of those block groups that people reside on. And you'll notice that predictably, the higher low to moderate income areas coincide with the more dense Black and Latinx neighborhood or block groups of this map. And so, when you see that, I think that's one of the things, of course, that's driven by these policies and the de facto segregation that has happened there. And the next slide, Aaron, will kind of starts to demonstrate some of that de facto segregation in action. This flyer on the left side here is a flyer that was being sent around in the early 1900s, where, well, actually, I think in the 1950s, that was warning white residents of Northeast Park Hill, which was the neighborhood that had the most Black and Latinx residents in it, about, as you can see on the slide, that Negroes are living on Glencoe, Ivy, Jasmine, Kearney, 17th Avenue, Parkway, and Park Hill. And the call to let us get together and protect ourselves. So on that, this type of thing right here, this flyer is a practice that was called blockbusting. And it actually was utilized by real estate agents to create a windfall of sales within a neighborhood by stoking up the fear of residents to sell their property so that they could, of course, get their commissions off of that. And in Park Hill, this was very successful, as you can see on the right side, a graph that shows the racial demographics of Northeast Park Hill. And I can't see that all the way because this is, let's see. So 1960, you could see that it was almost, in the high 90% or low 90% white demographic. in Northeast Park Hill. By 1970, it had completely flipped. Same number of population, by the way, almost same number of households, to a Black neighborhood by 1970. And as you can see throughout time, that dynamic has shifted, and we're getting back towards a space where it's flipping back. And that would be, you know, the complex dynamic of gentrification and displacement happening right there in that. And that's another complex topic for another day, but that's defining some of that legacy right there again, is that Black busting. Now, the case study that I wanted to talk about is what we did with the engagement effort on the Park Hill Golf Course, which is some of you may be familiar with, is a large 120 something acre golf course on Colorado Boulevard, and between about 38th and 40th, right by I-70. And what used to exist there actually was, back in the day, in the early 1900s, was a dairy farm that was connected to the Clayton the School for Boys, that was restricted to white boys only within that neighborhood. And so this legacy, as this demographic shift happened with a neighborhood that was right up against this golf course, was not allowed to, was right against this property, was not allowed to be involved in this school in any way, and was not allowed to be on that property in any way, but lived pretty close to it. It eventually turned into a golf course when they closed the dairy farm. That was an instructional place for those students, and it became a white-only golf course for a while. After that became illegal, it's still, from a pressure standpoint, all the way through the 70s, was still not a place where Black residents nearby were welcomed in any way. And so when you think about that type of thing, and now in the near future, I mean, in our current day here, it has recently been sold to a developer. There's a lot of controversy around it that I don't want to get into, but a developer that is poised to redevelop the property. And there's a lot of, within the traditional urban planning community engagement, we've seen, and I'm sure a lot of you have seen the dynamics where low socioeconomic populations, Black populations, Latinx populations have not had the same power within their voice to be able to shape their communities that they've been in. So what we did for this was partner with the city of Denver, their urban planning department, to really think about how to make this process more inclusive, what to do concurrently with what the city traditionally does with their engagement, and to really bolster that with engagement that is going to really think about what the legacy of this property has been, the displacement that has occurred over the number of years, and a really focused engagement strategy that was focused on the Black population of Northeast Park Hill, as well as low socioeconomic status there, and with the understanding that we really needed to bring in new voices. So the same process that we did for the Montbello school that I talked about earlier was the same thing that we did for this Park Hill process. And what we saw, what you see on this slide, is really actually one more comment here on that other slide, Aaron, is the demographics of the neighborhood currently on that left side, and how we engaged on the right side. So you can notice that the responses to that engagement, we engaged about 58% of the Black population in for the folks that did respond on demographic questions for that. On the next slide, we also tracked what it looks like for us to, get the age demographics correctly, the income demographics, and the rental versus ownership demographics. And we learned a lot. We didn't accomplish everything that we wanted to accomplish there. Upon reflection of this, we wanted to engage the Latinx community better. We also wanted to engage renters better in this situation. We did not. But these are the things that I think, when you're building best practice or you're trying to go after best practice, that failing forward is something that that we're really trying to put into practice here. It's learning from our mistakes, applying them to the future, and making sure that we change the dynamics there. So as a result of these results, these demographics and engagement, we were able to switch that up for the Montbello project and actually engage a lot better on our Latinx outreach for Montbello, which I believe had a strong impact on changing, on bringing in people and making sure that we were, like I said, increasing that community ownership of the process and making sure we're moving in the right direction.
Thank you both so much. I really was just going to wrap up. Again, thank you for sharing these great examples. And I just wanted to highlight best practices that they both shared when they were talking about their case studies. And I think you'll see a lot of these in their stories, that James was just talking about community ownership, the communities really being mobilized to act as part of this process. Sarah talked about it in terms of the coalition and how they use the data they have. They talked quite a bit around having and implementing a plan. There were strategic steps in Sarah's that they knew the barriers and they were going to go after all 4 of those barriers, right? Both of them discuss over and over again the use of data and specifically community voice to understand the problem at play, and then to use that data to really inform action and advocate for different changes. They talk about building political and community will as part of this process. Both James's examples of communities that probably wouldn't want to normally be engaged because they've not been able to be in the past and have some issues and trust issues with that too. Political will in terms of school leadership, we heard, city council, county commissioners, all of those kind of came about in terms of how they were building those. They also talked about using the evidence base to inform practice as well. Noting that, like, we know that these things can have an impact, so we try to shift our focus onto this so that it can have an impact downstream. And then both talked quite a bit around advancing equity by focusing on the actual population. James' example there of it was 58% of Black respondents, but it was only 28% who live in the community, really explicitly digging in to understand kind of how these populations are being impacted and what can happen. I also just noted too that I don't have listed here, but Sarah talked about policy and how she started small, but that I think we just lost her too, so she'll probably join, but we started small and with the city and set an example, and then it moved out to the county. That was a really important best practice as well. And then just I'd highlight once again, James's willingness to learn and failing forward, that's a crucial piece in terms of best practices of like knowing that you can get better over time and improve the work. So given that, we just wanted to open it up to questions and bring Dr. Betts back to facilitate that with us, and I'll stop sharing. And
oh my goodness,
Sarah's able to join again.
Yes, thank you so much. That was really fascinating, so interesting, and I think such a beautiful example of how academic and community practitioners can partner, and the importance of both grounding our work in stories and community voices, and then also understanding best practices and what data tell us, and taking those data back to communities. I think I'm just speechless. It was really wonderful. We have just a couple minutes, and I guess I'm going to kind of take moderator privilege here, as we don't have much time. And so I would love to ask you, I guess, for a wish list for 2022, or for whatever winter holiday you may or may not celebrate, sort of if you could have one thing for the coming year, what that would be. And maybe we'll start with Sarah.
Yeah, I lost internet as well, but we're back, and that's what it's like working in community. So I think one of the things I'd really like to see is a lot more. So I talked about a map earlier, and how we've mapped out and added more data to this map. My pie in the sky, if I had a magic wand, would be that many agencies in the community, not just the coalition that I facilitate, but we would all be collectively using this map to guide a lot of our strategic planning, whether that be in the city planning department, as they're thinking about connecting youth-friendly locations, all the way to, hey, where are we going to build this coffee shop to make sure that we put it where young people can access. That would be my pie in the sky dream, is if we can all use the shared data for building a better system.
That's wonderful. And James, how about you?
Yeah, I'd love to see the growing respect and empathy for the community as the experts of the work that we do, and that as the practitioners and researchers that are involved in this work, that we're there to, hold that up and make sure that that the community is really, like I said, respected and vaulted into the position that it should be.
Wonderful. And Erin, last words to you.
Yeah, I was going to say something similar to James, and I think we tried to present today in a way that really highlights that community and scientific expertise are both really important in this work. But I think even the implication of research to practice kind of assumes that it's me as the scientist who knows things that's going to be given to community. And I think really changing the script to say there's a lot the community knows that we can also learn from, and research based off of that is on my wish list. And the only other wish list piece I would have too is that there were more funding for upstream prevention generally. So.
Oh, I wish I could make that one happen. Okay, one last question that just came in actually from a practitioner, researcher, physician. I think to James, or really to anyone, any suggestions on how to partner with community members or connect with community members for those of us who are perhaps more practitioners or researchers?
Yeah, I would say you look to its leaders, the community's leaders, and socially connected people, and trusted people, and trusted organizations that that really have that connection, and being able to, of course, first respect and make them the leaders of the situation is what eventually brings that community along.
Wonderful closing words. Thank you again to everyone. To our audience, we will send out a link to the webinar if you want to see it again or share it with other people. You can find our other webinars online as well. And we hope you will join us in January when we're talking about online dating and domestic violence on January 11th. Thank you all. Happy holidays and be well.